From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NOCO. I'm Erin O'Toole. Juneteenth commemorates the day when the last of the enslaved people in our country learned of their freedom. It's been a federal holiday since 2021, and people celebrate Juneteenth in different ways. Some head to music festivals, some go to community gatherings, some make a point to frequent Black-owned businesses. A professor of African American Studies at Colorado State University is hosting a unique celebration on Saturday morning. Professor Ray Black leads a bicycle ride through a historic Black neighborhood in Fort Collins. In case you can't pedal along with Professor Black on Saturday morning, we thought we'd invite him on In the NOCO to give us the virtual version. Professor Ray Black, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. So tell me what you like about using a bike ride as a way to explore history.
Well, you're familiar with walking tours, and there is a part of, I do teach a African American history course, and part of history is oral history and public history. And a lot of that means getting out into the areas where history has happened. So we teach it in the classroom, but if you see the plaques around, like at the Hattie McDaniel House on Cherry Street, you go there and it brings history to life. Some people like to think that when you're in the space, you have some connection to the events.
Right.
So it's nice to not always sit in a classroom and do this and understand that history is all around us.
And you just mentioned one of the stops on the bike tour is the former home of Hattie McDaniel.
Yes.
She was the first African-American actor to win Best Supporting Actress at the Academy Awards. What fascinates you about Hattie McDaniel's story?
Part of the Fort Collins connection is when she was living here, obviously she was not famous, not a Hollywood star, but Fort Collins doesn't have a very large African-American community. I think the last census in 2020 said we're somewhere between 1 and 1.5% of the local population. In Colorado, less than 5%. But we do have to live somewhere. And where her house is, and we'll have somebody from the city to talk about the area, the block where the African Americans at that period were living, and that her house is one of them. So there is a place where the few African Americans in town were gathered and lived close enough in proximity. And it's good to know that.
Very good to know that, especially since it seems that a lot of this history has been overlooked. Mm-hmm. There's evidence many Black workers were on the payroll at Great Western Sugar, the sugar beet factory, more than a century ago, and lived nearby. But the Fort Collins City website says there aren't many written records about them. I'm wondering what that says to you about the importance of talking about this history.
Well, that goes into two questions. Always the importance of talking about history. If you think of history as explaining how we arrived at this point in time and place, and a lot of the oral history, when people are moving to a place for jobs, my wife and I moved to Fort Collins to work at CSU. A lot of the African-American population we had in Fort Collins came to work for HP. And when they downsized, we lost a lot of that African-American population, but they're still here. And part of understanding history is that when McDaniel and her family were here and the other families were here, they weren't here to make history. They were here to live and make a living and grow. So you don't think of yourselves or the period as a historical event, but understanding that the West is full of Black history. When the move west, that included African Americans. That included folks who were leaving. The 90 to 95% of the African American population before 1865 was in the southern states. And the Great Migration included the West, included Denver, included Wyoming. Black cowboys were here. Mm-hmm. So it's not just cowboys, but farmers and grocers, and we're part of the fabric, a small part of the fabric in Fort Collins, but still part of the fabric.
Juneteenth is a new holiday for some people. Mm-hmm. You have talked about how both Memorial Day and Independence Day could give us some ideas for how to think about Juneteenth. Could you say more about that?
Well, Juneteenth is also known as Freedom Day. And what happened after the 1865 in April, when that war ended, and you get the Emancipation and the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery in the United States, well, that takes a while to filter through. And in Texas, where we get the origin of Juneteenth, it took a couple of years. It took the Union Army coming in and saying, no, slavery has actually ended. These enslaved people are actually free. And it had been a local holiday for many, many years in movements in Texas to have it as a state holiday. And then about 3-4 years ago, when the nation made Juneteenth a holiday, we understanding that independence is a holiday for the U.S. being declared independent from somebody. And Freedom Day, Juneteenth, is a celebration of freedom. So these are celebrations of freedom, and Memorial Day is a remembering of those who sacrificed so that we can have freedom. So Juneteenth, in the same way, is recognizing one of the steps African Americans took to celebrate and achieve freedom, the same promise that all Americans and those who seek to come to this country and have this unalienable right to life, liberty, and happiness in the founding documents. So that's where Juneteenth is a celebration of overcoming forces that would keep a good segment of population, African-American population, from being free.
What do you hope Juneteenth means 10 years from now, or 50 years from now even?
The challenge for holidays, and fortunately we're able to celebrate this in many different ways. Our Fort Collins Juneteenth has 3 days. It's music, activities for youth, a bike ride, exercise, vendors, a lot of different aspects of African American life and history and culture in Fort Collins, and representative of the rest of the country. But also in 10 years, understanding that this is the way into the history of African Americans in Fort Collins and in Colorado and in the country. It's not just hey, we have a day off, let's go buy a mattress. Not that buying mattresses is bad on a holiday, but it is also how this came to be, how we are celebrating what it is that the country has promised. We are celebrating that even though forces are trying to deny things, the spirit, in this case, African Americans, desires to be free and equal and to celebrate life.
Well, Professor Ray Black, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, and hope to see you on the bike ride or another Juneteenth event this weekend.
Professor Black said his Juneteenth bike ride is a relatively easy 5-mile route. If you'd like to ride along, meet at Lee Martinez Park in Fort Collins at 7:30 Saturday morning. And have a happy Juneteenth. That's it for us today on In the NOCO. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thank you so much for listening.